ridge of a dune, cuts the image in two. Bright blazing orange of the setting sun, dark sand trailing off into gravel and scrub. 5 black teeth rise from the ridge and paint long crooked shadows down onto something that looks as if it was drawn with a ruler. Chaos settles over order. In a light wind that nevertheless seems to sand down the landscape with the sand it carries like a master carpenter, a Union Jack winds around a flagpole. 8/10, as correct and ideal as if from a catalogue from Expedition Supplies. A display of an adventure that perhaps is only meant to be experienced in imagination, in an ocean, in a dream. Men in sand-colored uniforms, pressed and free of stains, pith helmets, the jackets strictly belted, tailored with sewn-on pockets, trousers ending just above the knee, beneath them, calves, high stockinged, set into heavy shoes, sweat, and eyes that fix on what rises up along the ridge. Riders, bathed in light as if the sky had sent them. Or hell, a rasping voice. Jenkins. Charlotte looks at Carla questioningly. A friend of yours? Carla grins and nods toward the largest tent in camp. In that little stream out back, I'm going to cool down a bit. Barely has Alex spoken the wish aloud when Sasha bolts down the slope, grows smaller and smaller, the whining fainter and fainter. Skin hangs in tatters. Beneath it something else. The flesh is dry, gleams, does not bleed. Like the skin of a snake. The Bedouin women look on knowingly. A woman smiles at Charlotte as she and Jenkins' man carry the softly whimpering Alex into the village. The old one had known something, had told Alex she needed to remember who she was. Or what? Water! Charlotte shouts into the small hut. Old men sit on a rug around flat bowls, sprang up as the Englishman lay the shredded body onto the rug. No blood, Charlotte hears Rupert whisper quietly. Jenkins shakes his head. Not now, he hisses at his men. Jenkins wanted an adventure. Now, he's part of an adventure. The greatest. Charlotte pours a broad bucket of water over the battered Alex, watches how her love begins to fade. Alex's gaze loses focus, drifts as she sinks into herself and something else rises. No, please, not you. Charlotte holds her ear close to Alex's lips. What? Not who? Heavy breathing, then a brief silence. Not Sasha. Couch of Cthulhu. Entry requires trauma. Reality pays the bill. Otto was already sitting in his chair. The small glasses danced on his nose as he tried to shoo away an itch through strange grimaces without taking his hands off the pen and clipboard. There are still a few missing, he said tiredly after a glance at the empty chairs. Gregory and Poppy are on a mission. Annette chimed in and seemed happy to have contributed something. Not anymore, Otto corrected. Back in England. MI7. Oh, Annette seemed disappointed. Didn't even say goodbye. She looked toward the door. Where is everyone today? Right. Otto let the pen drop onto the clipboard, wiped his free hand across his face and ended up pinching the bridge of his nose between thumb and index finger, squeezing his eyes shut. So, Hans, Charlotte, Alex and Jacob, late. I'm here. Otto flinched. Jacob, we had agreed that you wouldn't do that. Oh, hello, Jacob. Annette waved her arms. Sorry. He leaned forward, the chair creaking and groaning beneath him. Didn't notice. How long have you been here? Otto asked as he cleaned his glasses. Don't know. A while. Jacob returned hesitantly. Oh, you could have said hello at least. Annette sighed. Do you know why the others are late? Otto wanted to know. Sasha, Jacob answered flatly. Oh, Annette drew in a breath and held it. Alex is tired, Jacob murmured. Left, Sasha is. Otto's gaze fell on the door. Annette followed. Jacob lowered his head, pulled his shoulders up. Hans held the door open at full arm's length, his other arm supporting Alex, with Charlotte bracing her from the left side. Oh, well, all my favorite people together, Alex pressed out. And Jacob's here too. Don't be such an arsehole. Charlotte hissed, and she and Hans lowered the battered Alex into a chair. Hans nodded briefly and sat down in the free spot next to Annette. Charlotte took a seat between Hans and Alex. Her gaze fell on the two empty chairs. MI7, Otto said curtly. Charlotte nodded, looked around the group. Did we miss anything? Otto got afraid when he noticed Jacob. Annette giggled. Is that any wonder? Otto asked, indignant. Sorry, Jacob whispered. What was on the agenda today? Hans looked at Otto questioningly. Carla, this Nazan and control. Otto picked up the pen again and looked at the now complete group. Hans, only moments before still comparatively composed, twitched nervously at the mention of the name Nazan. She taught me a lot, Annette said quietly. Me too, Hans stammered. But I didn't ask for it. Yes, we already discussed that in the last session. Otto said sharply and tapped his pen against the notes on his clipboard. Hans let his head drop, looked over at Alex. Alex still seemed drained and exhausted. Why don't you all take your medication first in case you haven't done so yet? Otto pulled 4 vials from his jacket. Charlotte nodded slowly, brought her own pills and swallowed one down. Hans caught Alex's short impulse to intervene, but she was too slow. By the time Alex had raised her arm, the pills had already vanished. Good. Otto seemed satisfied. It's only in your best interest. What you've seen will destroy you. Hans raised his head, looked from one to the other. Then he looked at Charlotte. It already has, he mouthed silently. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut. Just before the now rising thought could ignite, her eyelids grew heavy, her bones leaden, as all tension gave way. Hans looked to Annette imploringly. She smiled blissfully. Hello, Hans. He twisted his trembling lips into something like a smile. Hello, he rasped against the lump in his throat. Why don't we simply stop with Carla, said Schulte. Charlotte, there was quite a lot to tell, wasn't there? Charlotte fought against the weight on her eyelids, tried to focus. Yes, Carla, she whispered. Otto held the pen circling above the paper like a raptor. Yes? Hans watched Charlotte struggle against the pills, saw Alex shake her head almost imperceptibly. She wanted to erase everything. Charlotte hesitated. Everything. If I may jump in for a moment. Alex let herself fall forward limply, trying to come across as elegant, but her chin only dropped into emptiness after her arm slid off her thigh, the one she had intended to prop herself up on. With a disgusted, irritated look, she eyed her slack arms and leaned back, managing with the help of one hand to cross one leg over the other. So, I would want to curse Carla because with her it all began and ended, Hans whispered. And ended, yes, thank you, Hans. Alex ran her tongue over her dry lips. Otto's pen scratched loudly across the paper. All eyes turned to Otto. Forgive me, slipped, Otto made a gesture with his hand. Go on, please. Alex looked over at Charlotte. Charlotte straightened up. The time. She wanted to burn time. And how so? Otto pushed his glasses up on his shiny nose. A misinterpretation of the Old Testament and many dangerous books. Charlotte creased her forehead in the effort to force her eyes wide open. More precisely? Otto pressed. What does that have to do with anything? Hans asked. It's about how Charlotte feels about it, isn't it? Yes, exactly, Annette agreed. How do you feel about it, Charlotte? Alex lifted her heavy left hand and laid it on Charlotte's. Not well, she whispered. Not well at all. We'll continue working on that later. I can see that it weighs on you. Please take another pill. Otto struck something out on the paper, scratching loudly across it, tearing paper underneath apart. Jakob stared absently on the scrawl. Annette raised her hands, smiled apologetically, and covered her ears. Hans looked from the clipboard to Annette, looked to Alex. Had none of this happened, we would probably never have come together in this way, wouldn't we? He held his gaze fixed on Alex. Charlotte looked at Hans for a long time. A thread of saliva dripped from her lower lip. Alex held Hans' gaze and fished the thread from the air, wiped Charlotte the rest from her lip. Yes, said Alex. Silver lining, right? We're taking a short break. Otto said curtly, jumped up, crossed the room with his coat billowing, let the door fall shut behind him a bit too loud. Come with me. Jakob murmured at Alex, got up and hooked his arm through hers on the way to the window. Alex offered no resistance and leaned next to Jakob with her elbows on the windowsill, staring out into the darkness together with him. Who are you? Jakob asked after a while of staring. Who am I supposed to be? Alex asked with a false air of ignorance. Sasha, Jakob added. Sasha is gone. Alex's voice seemed to freeze mid-break. Hasn't been around for a while, Jakob murmured and threw Alex a sideways glance. Yes, Alex chewed on the words. It was necessary. Right. That was enough for Jakob. He had known Alex long enough to take the little as given. Hans stood before Charlotte's chair. He looked down at the slumped woman, whose ice-gray eyes fixed expressionlessly on a point on the floor. He looked around. Annette waved, grinned. Say hello, she called out, excited. Hans looked back to Charlotte. He slipped his hand inconspicuously into her sewn-on pocket and felt out the pill vial within. Unseen, he let it slide into his trouser pocket, feigning to only pull a handkerchief with which he dabbed Charlotte's mouth dry. A slight reaction in Charlotte's face. A smile. He looked over to Jakob and Alex, saw the reflections of their faces in the pane. Why control, though? Annette asked out of nowhere into the room. Hans turned his head, saw the bewilderment in her eyes. Would you have preferred a different topic? Carla Nazan, control? Annette looked at him as though she was waiting for the penny to drop for Hans. Where are you going with this, Annette? Hans sat down again. I know you all think I'm stupid, she began, lowered her voice, and then whispered. I'm maybe sometimes a bit slow on the uptake, but something really stinks here. Hans leaned toward Annette. You're not stupid. You sometimes say really strange things, but in the end it mostly all makes sense. Hans smiled. I had read that garlic helps with dandruff. Made soap with garlic and let it soak in for several hours. I smelled of garlic for half a year. Annette giggled. That was stupid, Hans concluded. Charlotte jerked in fits and clucked and gurgled. Does that help you? She asked then. Hans looked over to her. Annette followed his gaze. What? He whispered. She asked whether that helps you. Yes, Hans hissed. I understood that, but why? What does it say on her vial? Annette asked, grinning. Which vial? The vial you nicked from her when you thought no one was looking. Hans looked at Annette in surprise. course, she nodded. Hans fished the vial out of his pocket. 25 milligrams, he said quietly. Of what? Annette whispered. Doesn't say. He furrowed his brow. Just 25 milligrams. Have you never wondered why Charlotte always turns into a zombie right on time when the session starts? Annette looked at Hans for a long time. I have, he whispered. Alex cleared her throat. Jakob looked into Alex's reflection's eyes. Alex slipped away and looked past the reflecting community room into the darkness. She leaned her head forward slightly, concentrated until her forehead hit the cold pane. Shitty pills, she murmured. What? Jakob asked, irritated. I was just thinking I had just seen myself out there, she said quietly, haltingly. Yeah, shitty pills. I was just thinking I'd seen you out there too. With a loud screech, the door flew open and Otto Schulte came barreling into the room. The coat followed him like a lovesick piece of fabric until he swung it around the chair legs and it hung there, sad. Right, back to your seats and on we go. The hour's almost up and we've accomplished nothing today. Alex let herself drop heavily. Somewhere deep inside her, someone was rattling at a gate and screaming with a shrill, cracking voice that faded into the darkness. I still don't quite know what this mysterious Nazan has to do with all of this, Otto asked. Hans blinked twice nervously at the mention of the name, and I haven't quite grasped who she actually is. Otto looked around the group. Nazan is one of the sisters, Annette said. The sons became giants and the daughters became... Otto looked on expectantly. Something like Nazan. Otto raised an eyebrow, pulled at the corners of his mouth. Good, it's hard to write about an individual of a certain group using only her name. It's like trying to explain to an alien what women are, using Charlotte as an example and saying they are all Charlottes. Otto shook his head. Very old. Very powerful. Angel blood. Charlotte stammered quietly. Something like Merlin. Or Morgana. Otto rode along. Annette looked at Hans, then Otto. She's dead. I watched her die. Otto paused, looked to Annette. How distressing. A strange expression flashed across his face, which he caught immediately and buried it under a friendly smile. Then, Hans won't need to be afraid anymore, will he? He hinted at a wink. Hans shifted nervously on his chair. No, he looked to Annette. Since she's dead, probably not. Charlotte laughed out loud, suddenly tore her eyes wide open and fixed Annette for a moment. Do you remember at the Para Palace what I saw in the bathroom? Annette looked confused for a moment and then, of course, Joan of Arc. Hans looked from Charlotte to Annette. When we had been smoking opium? Yes. Charlotte let out with a powerless rush of air into the room. Annette grinned. Opium, right? Alex, who had been watching the goings-on, looked from one to the other. Hadn't you seen Venus under the influence of hashish, Charlotte? We were at the Para for longer. Charlotte cut Alex off. Otto looked at Charlotte carefully, then Alex shrugged. Were there several of them, or just one? Or is there still something like a Nazan? They're all dead, unfortunately, Annette said and let her head hang. But she had shown you quite a lot, Hans, hadn't she? Otto looked at Hans over small glasses. Yes, Hans nodded. Everything, you said, hadn't you? Otto wouldn't let up. I don't know. Everything is probably an exaggeration because that would assume I knew what everything is, and she didn't show me a fruit bowl with 10 fruits beforehand, didn't say that that was everything, and then put an equal bowl in front of me. Please, Hans, that's everything. Nothing is missing. Feel free to count. Maybe she was only half full. Maybe only a grape bit. Maybe I only saw an apple and didn't know the rest of the fruit at all, which is why I wouldn't have been able to say whether that was even fruit. Do you understand, Otto? Charlotte giggled quietly. Annette let a quiet, "Oh, it's I," slip, and Alex understood. Jacob looked confused. Otto pulled up his nose, making an unpleasant swallowing sound in the process, took off his glasses and cleaned them. "Jacob, tell me about your mother." Jacob went pale, and for a moment it seemed as if the wallpaper pattern behind him was imprinting itself through him. Alex threw him an encouraging look and nodded. "She was only rarely kind." He paused. "Father was gone." He seemed to be searching for words. I hid, and she always found me." Otto wrote and looked up. "Go on, please." "Was in the wardrobe then. She tears the door open, sees me, and..." "Yes?" Otto looked around the group, saw the honest concern. "Closed the door." Jacob sweated. "Looked right through me." "And then?" Otto asked. Annette sobbed quietly. "I was in the apartment, in the walls, under the floor, standing right in front of Mom, but..." He faltered. "Couldn't see me." "A boy-shaped hole in reality," Otto said quietly as he wrote it down. Jacob faded visibly, flickered slightly. Alex laid a heavy hand on him. Children with certain gifts often develop their gifts in times of great physical or psychological distress. He looked around the group. "Like Alex." Otto held the gaze. Alex didn't flinch. "Why are you telling us this, Otto?" Alex asked in a cold voice. "Well, because I know that magic exists, because I know that it sleeps in many people, and because I know that there are people like Nazan," Otto concluded. Annette lowered her head. Hans looked at Otto from the side. "And because I know that the daughters can also be sisters." Otto's gaze rested on Annette, who seemed to shrink even further beneath his look. "If we want to work together successfully, we have to trust one another." "What did you say last to me, Otto?" Charlotte whispered with an undercurrent of determination. "Are you finally seeing the light?" "So the hour's up," Hans said and jumped to his feet. "A shame." He took Annette by the hand and pulled her over to Charlotte. "Help her, please," he asked quietly. He threw Jacob a brief look. Jacob got up and helped Alex out of a chair. "Goodbye, Otto. See you next week." Hans called out loudly, trying to get his trembling voice under control. Together, Jacob, Alex, Hans, Annette, and Charlotte left the room. The door felt shut loudly. Otto Schulte sat for a while longer and wrote, then got up and made his way across the room towards the door. Just as he was about to switch off the light, his gaze fell on one of the windows. "Interesting," he said quietly and studied the two motionless reflections of Jacob and Alex in the pane.
Shadows fall through slatted wood, tiny hands where no one should. Mother's steps a measured beat, cracked linoleum under feet. Breathing shallow, small and still, wishing hard with all his will. Little Jacob lives in fear, hides away when she is near. In the dark, behind the door, prays she won't come anymore. Fingers crossed, his heart a drum he closes tight, and he becomes. Dust collects in broken drawers, mice don't squeak behind the doors. Words were knives and silence worse, Magic grew inside the curse. She opened up the cabinet wide, looked through him like he'd never cried. The radio hums, but not for him. The bulb above swings cold and dim. His body's here, but mind is fog. He drifts between the floor and cog. No one sees the boy who's gone. He faded out to carry on. Little Jacob lives in fear, not quite gone, not quite here. Under beds and in the cracks, never speaks but never lacks. Magic shaped by pain and dread, invisible but never dead. He learned to vanish, not to run, to hide inside what she'd begun. Beneath her hands he disappeared, not with screams but with the weird. A whisper, thin, translucent thread, a boy-shaped hole the world calls dead. A slipper drops, a chair leg breaks, the cupboard breathes, the mirror shakes. He's in the pipes, the keyholes blink, behind the coats, the kitchen sink. He's every space that shouldn't speak, a spell of sorrow wild and bleak. Little Jakob lives in fear. He's always close but never near. He walks through walls, avoids her eyes. He answers pain but never cries. The world forgets as children do, but magic knows what he's been through. The room's too loud, the world's too fast. Magic grows where pain can last. His skin turns glass, his voice a thread. No one knows he isn't dead. She opened doors, he wasn't there. She saw right through him like the air. He found others shaped like him, with borrowed skin and edges dim. Wrong voice, wrong face, wrong kind of name. Born to break the parents' shame. He lives for those the world won't hold, the cast aside, the shame, the bold. He helps, he hides, he reappears, but little Jacob lives in fear that his mother's still near. She called his name. She called his name.